Get your black ass out of this seat right now!
The flight attendant stood over him, teeth bared, finger jabbing toward the back of the plane.
Who the hell do you think you are? You look like you crawled off a damn bus. Oh, so you're deaf and dumb. Typical.
He said nothing. She snatched his bag off the seat and threw it down the aisle like garbage. He still didn't move, just watched her with calm, steady eyes. That made her angrier. She leaned in and slapped him, full force, across the face. The crack echoed through the cabin. He touched his cheek, then said quietly,
"You just ended your own career."
10 minutes later, she was begging. Have you ever watched someone destroy their entire life in under 10 minutes? Yeah, that moment right there changes everything. Let's get into the story. Let me rewind. Let me tell you how we got here. It was 6:45 in the morning at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. The sky was still bruised purple and orange from the early sunrise. The air outside smelled like jet fuel and cold asphalt. Ground crews moved between aircraft in bright yellow vests, their breath forming small clouds in the chill. At the far end of the private terminal, a black man stepped out of a dark SUV. No driver holding a sign, no assistant carrying his bags. Just him, alone, unhurried, a leather weekender bag slung over one shoulder, and a tablet tucked under his arm. His name was Harrison Taylor. If you searched his name online, you wouldn't find much. No flashy Instagram, no magazine covers, no red carpet photos. Harrison Taylor was the kind of billionaire most people had never heard of, and that was exactly how he wanted it. He was 52 years old, grew up in West Baltimore, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at a hospital laundry room. Scholarships took him to Howard University. Discipline took him everywhere else. Over 25 years, he built Apex Horizon Enterprises from a one-room logistics office into a $4.2 billion empire spanning aerospace, defense contracts, and commercial real estate across 11 states. But here's the thing about Harrison. He didn't look like a billionaire. Not by most people's standards anyway. No Rolex, no tailored suit, no diamond cufflinks. This morning, he wore a plain black hoodie, dark jeans, and a pair of worn sneakers he'd had for 3 years. Noise-canceling headphones hung around his neck. He dressed this way on purpose. Always had. Because Harrison believes something most wealthy people never think about. The way people treat you when they don't know your net worth tells you everything you need to know about their character. He walked through the private terminal with a quiet nod to the woman at the front desk. She smiled and waved him through. She knew exactly who he was. She'd checked him in dozens of times. Outside, on the tarmac, his aircraft waited. A Gulfstream G700, tail number G-APEX. $65 million of engineering perfection. The jet was registered under Apex Horizon Enterprises. Harrison was the sole owner. He chartered it through Luxair Atlantic, a luxury aviation management company that handled scheduling, crew, and maintenance. He climbed the steps. The cabin door opened, and that familiar scent hit him. Fresh leather, polished mahogany, a faint trace of vanilla from the diffuser near the galley. The interior was cream and dark wood. 4 oversized seats in the main cabin, a conference table with embedded screens, a private bedroom suite in the rear behind a frosted glass partition. Harrison settled into his usual seat, second row, window side. He placed his bag on the seat beside him, pulled out his tablet, and began reviewing documents for the meeting ahead. He was flying to Savannah, Georgia to close a $350 million acquisition of a regional logistics company. Just another Tuesday for a man who moved quietly and built empires in silence. Now, let me introduce the other person in this story. Candace Moore, 44 years old, senior flight attendant with Luxair Atlantic for 12 years. Blonde hair pulled back tight, pressed uniform, thin smile that could freeze water. Among her colleagues, Candace had a reputation. The polite version was difficult. The honest version, whispered in break rooms and crew vans, was something uglier. Multiple co-workers had noticed a pattern. Candace treated passengers of color differently. Colder greetings, shorter patience, longer stares. 3 formal complaints had been filed against her over the years, all from Black or Latino passengers. All 3 were investigated by the same middle manager. All 3 were closed with no action taken. This morning, Candace was not supposed to be on this flight. Her usual route had been canceled due to maintenance, and she was reassigned to the Teterboro charter at the last minute. She arrived rushed. She did not review the flight manifest. She did not check the client profile. She boarded the jet, walked into the main cabin, and saw Harrison Taylor sitting in the owner's suite. A black man, in a hoodie, in the most expensive seat on the aircraft. Her smile vanished. Her back straightened. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't ask who he was. She didn't check the system. She didn't radio the front desk. She assumed. And that assumption was about to cost her everything. Candace didn't walk toward Harrison. She marched, heels clicking hard against the cabin floor like a countdown. She stopped right in front of him, didn't greet him, didn't smile. She crossed her arms and looked down at him the way someone looks at a stain on an expensive rug. "Can I see your boarding confirmation?" Her voice wasn't professional. It was sharp, accusatory. The kind of tone you use when you've already decided someone is guilty before they open their mouth. Harrison looked up from his tablet. He didn't react to the tone. He simply opened the LuxAir app on his phone and held it toward her. The screen showed the charter confirmation. His name, the flight number, the tail number, today's date, everything. Candace barely glanced at it. She tilted her head and let out a small, dry laugh through her nose. "This just shows a booking. It doesn't prove you're supposed to be sitting here. In this section." She emphasized the words, "this section," like they were coated in poison. Harrison put his phone down. His voice was level, measured. The kind of calm that comes from decades of being underestimated. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Candace's jaw tightened. She uncrossed her arms and planted both hands on her hips. "Look, I don't know what kind of mix-up happened at the desk, but this is the owner's suite. It's reserved. Maybe you got confused about which aircraft you were booked on. It happens." She paused, then added, with a smile that had no warmth in it whatsoever, "There are standard seats in the back, much more appropriate." Harrison didn't respond. He just held her gaze for a long, still moment. Then he put his headphones on and went back to his tablet. That silence, that refusal to engage, did something to Candace. You could see it in the way her nostrils flared, the way her fingers curled at her sides. She wasn't used to being ignored, and she certainly wasn't used to being ignored by someone she had already decided was beneath her. She turned on her heel, walked to Harrison's leather weekender bag sitting on the seat beside him, and grabbed it with both hands. "Let me help you relocate to the back. You'll be more comfortable there." She didn't ask permission. She just picked up his bag and started walking down the aisle like she owned the aircraft. Harrison stood. When he rose from his seat, the cabin seemed to shrink. He was 6'2", broad shoulders. Even in a hoodie, his presence filled the space. He didn't shout. He didn't lunge. He simply said, firmly, clearly, with the kind of authority that doesn't need volume, "Put my bag down. I'm not moving anywhere." Candace froze mid-step. She turned around slowly, still holding the bag. For a half second, something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe even a flash of fear. But her pride swallowed it quickly. She dropped the bag, not gently. She let it hit the floor with a hard thump that echoed through the cabin. Then she leaned in slightly, lowered her voice just enough to sound threatening, and said, "You don't want to make this difficult. Trust me." She turned and muttered, loud enough for anyone within 10 feet to hear, "This is exactly what happens when people don't read the damn rules." From the galley doorway, a pair of wide eyes watched everything. Elaine Foster, 26 years old, junior flight attendant, 6 months on the job. She stood frozen with a tray of glasses in her hands, barely breathing. She had seen Candace be rude before. She had heard the whispered stories from other crew members, but this was something else entirely. Elaine wanted to say something. Her mouth opened slightly, but the words didn't come. Candace had seniority. Candace had connections. Candace had already gotten one junior attendant transferred for insubordination last year, which everyone knew was code for disagreeing with her. So Elaine stayed silent, for now. Back in the cabin, Harrison sat down again. He put his headphones back on. He returned to his tablet. His face was unreadable, the kind of stillness that could mean patience or could mean a storm building behind a wall. Candace wasn't done. She came back. This time her face was flushed red. She stood directly in front of Harrison and spoke louder now, louder than necessary. Loud enough that Captain Gregory Adams might have heard from the cockpit if the reinforced door hadn't been sealed shut for pre-flight checks. I'm going to say this one more time. You either show me a valid ID that proves you belong in this section, or I'm calling ground security and having you physically removed from this aircraft. Your choice. Harrison removed his headphones, slowly. He folded them and placed them on the armrest. I'd like to speak to your captain. Candace's eyes went wide with theatrical disbelief. You don't get to make demands on my aircraft. You're a passenger. I'm the crew. I decide who sits where. And I'm telling you, you do not belong here. She pointed toward the back of the plane. Now move, or I'll make the call. Harrison looked at her, really looked at her. His eyes were steady, his breathing was slow, and when he spoke, his voice was so quiet, she had to lean in to hear it. I'm not going anywhere. Do what you need to do. Something snapped in Candace. Maybe it was the calm in his voice. Maybe it was the fact that he wouldn't bend. Maybe it was the simple, unbearable reality that a black man in a hoodie was sitting in the most expensive seat on the plane and refusing to submit to her authority. She reached for his headphones on the armrest. Her hand shot out fast, grabbing for them like she was going to confiscate a toy from a child. Harrison pulled back instinctively, a reflex. His hand brushed against her forearm as he moved, barely a touch. The kind of contact that happens when someone invades your space and you flinch. Candace recoiled like she'd been burned. She stumbled back a full step. Her eyes went huge. Her mouth fell open in exaggerated shock. And then she swung. Open palm, full force, right across Harrison Taylor's face. The sound was like a firecracker going off in a library. Crack! It echoed off the mahogany walls. It bounced off the leather seats. It hung in the recycled cabin air like smoke. Elaine dropped a glass in the galley. It shattered on the floor. Her hand flew to her mouth. Harrison's head turned from the force of the blow. A red mark bloomed instantly on his left cheek. He sat completely still for what felt like an eternity, but was probably 5 seconds. Candace was breathing hard now, her chest heaving, her hands still raised. She pointed her finger directly at his face and said, her voice shaking, not with fear, but with rage, "Don't you ever put your hands on me. I saw what you did. You grabbed me. I have every right to defend myself." She straightened her uniform, smoothed her hair, and her voice shifted, suddenly controlled, suddenly rehearsed, like a switch had been flipped. "I'm calling security. You're getting off this plane, and when they get here, I'm telling them exactly what you did. You assaulted a crew member." Harrison didn't speak. Not yet. He raised his hand slowly, not toward her, toward his hoodie pocket. 2 fingers, moving with the kind of deliberate calm that made Candace take another step back. He pulled out his phone. The screen was on. The recording app was open. A red timer was counting. It read 14 minutes and 32 seconds. He'd been recording since the moment she first walked toward his seat. He set the phone face up on the armrest. The microphone icon pulsed gently on the screen. He looked at Candace and said, in a voice so calm it barely registered above the hum of the engines, Everything you've said, everything you've done, the slap, the threat, the lie you're about to tell security, it's all right here. He tapped the screen once, audio and video. Candace's face changed. The rage didn't disappear, but something else crept in underneath it. Something cold. Something she hadn't felt since she'd started this confrontation. Doubt. Harrison leaned back in his seat, folded his hands and said, just as quietly as before, "Now, I'd still like to speak to your captain." Most people, when they realize they're being recorded, stop. They backtrack. They lower their voice. They suddenly remember how to act like a decent human being. Candace Moore was not most people. She stared at the phone on the armrest for 3 long seconds. The red timer kept counting. 14 minutes, 41 seconds, 42, 43. Then she did something that told you everything you needed to know about who she really was. She smiled. Not a nervous smile, not an embarrassed smile, a cold, hard smile, the kind that says, "I've been in worse situations and I've always won." She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and said, "Record all you want. When security gets here, we'll see who they believe. A 12-year senior crew member or some random guy in a hoodie who forced his way into first class." She let that word hang in the air. Random. Like he was nothing. Like he was nobody. Then she turned her back on him, walked to the intercom panel near the galley, and pressed the button for ground operations. Her voice shifted instantly, softer, higher, trembling just slightly. A performance so polished it could have won an award. "Ground ops, this is Senior Attendant Moore on G Apex. I need security at the aircraft immediately. We have an unruly passenger in the owner's suite who is refusing to comply with crew instructions." She paused, then added, quieter, like she was confiding something serious. "He became physically aggressive. He grabbed my arm. I feel unsafe. Please send someone now." She released the button, took a breath. And when she turned back toward the cabin, her expression had reset completely. Calm, professional, victimized. It was a masterclass in manipulation. From the galley, Elaine Foster watched everything unfold. Her hands were shaking, not from the cold, from the weight of what she'd just witnessed. She had seen the whole thing, every second. She saw Candace approach Harrison without checking the manifest. She saw Candace grab his bag. She saw Candace reach for his headphones. She saw Harrison pull away, nothing more than a flinch. And she saw Candace slap him. There was no grab. There was no assault. The only person who put hands on anyone in that cabin was Candace Moore. Elaine knew this. She knew it in her bones. But she also knew what happened to people who crossed Candace. Last year, a junior attendant named Rachel had disagreed with Candace during a crew briefing. Nothing dramatic, just a polite suggestion about seating arrangements. Within 2 weeks, Rachel was transferred to cargo operations at a regional hub in Nebraska. Candace never admitted to anything, but everyone knew. So Elaine stood there, frozen, holding a dustpan full of broken glass from the cup she'd dropped, her conscience screaming at her to speak, her fear screaming louder to stay quiet. 2 minutes later, footsteps on the air stairs. 2 ground security officers boarded the jet, both in dark uniforms, both broad-shouldered. One was older, gray at the temples, calm face, the kind of man who's seen enough in his career to not jump to conclusions. The other was younger, tense, hand resting near his radio like he was expecting trouble. Candace intercepted them at the cabin door before they'd taken 2 steps inside. She spoke fast, hands gesturing, voice still carrying that trembling, fragile quality she'd manufactured for the intercom call. "Thank you for coming. The gentleman in seat 2, he forced his way into the owner's suite. I asked him politely to move, multiple times. He refused. Then he grabbed my arm aggressively. I had to defend myself. He's been hostile and threatening ever since. She pointed toward Harrison without looking at him. I want him removed from this aircraft immediately. The older officer, his name tag read Sullivan, nodded slowly. He didn't rush. He walked down the aisle toward Harrison, who was still seated, still calm, tablet resting on his lap, phone still recording on the armrest. "Sir, I'm Officer Sullivan with Teterboro Ground Security. Can I see some identification, please?" Harrison reached into his back pocket. No sudden movements, no resistance. He pulled out his wallet, opened it, and handed over his driver's license. Sullivan took the license, looked at the photo, looked at Harrison, looked at the name, Harrison Taylor. Sullivan's expression didn't change, not visibly, but something behind his eyes shifted. A small pause, a half-second longer than normal spent staring at the name on that card. He handed the license back to Harrison. Then he stepped 3 feet away, turned his back to the cabin, and keyed his radio. His voice was low, but in the quiet of a grounded jet, sound carries. "Ground Ops, this is Sullivan. I need a client verification on tail number Golf Alpha Papa Echo X-Ray. Can you confirm the owner-client registered for today's charter?" Silence. 10 seconds. 15. 20. Then the radio crackled. "Sullivan, confirmed. Tail number G Apex is registered to Apex Horizon Enterprises. Today's sole charter client is Harrison Taylor, CEO and owner of the registering company. He is the principal client on file." Sullivan lowered his radio. He stood very still for a moment. Then he turned, not toward Harrison, toward Candace. The look on his face was something between disbelief and barely controlled anger. He walked past her without speaking and approached Harrison again. This time, his tone was different, softer, almost apologetic. "Mr. Taylor, I sincerely apologize for the disruption. Is there anything you need from us at this time?" Harrison looked at him, a long, measured look. Then he said, "I need her off my plane." 3 words, quiet as a whisper, heavy as concrete. Sullivan nodded once. The younger officer was already staring at Candace. His hand had dropped from his radio. His mouth was slightly open. And Candace was standing near the galley entrance with her arms frozen at her sides. The color had drained from her face so completely she looked like she'd been carved from candle wax. Her lips moved. No sound came out at first. Then, stammering, cracking, "Wait, what? No, that can't be right. He can't be. Look at him. There's no way he's..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Everyone in that cabin heard what she almost said. The words she swallowed were louder than anything she'd screamed. "Yo, nah, wait. Did she just do that? She really just slapped the guy who owns the plane. Like, the plane. She's on his property, wearing a uniform his money pays for, and she just hit him. I'm not gonna lie, that's wild. But nah, listen, what happens next? Yeah, it's way worse. For her." The cabin was silent, the kind of silence that has weight, that presses down on your chest. Then Elaine Foster stepped forward. She came out of the galley slowly. Her hands were still trembling. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she started, but it grew stronger with every word. "Officers, I need to tell you what actually happened." Candace's head snapped toward her, eyes wide, fury instant. "Elaine, don't." But Elaine kept going. She looked directly at Sullivan and spoke clearly. "I saw the entire interaction from the galley. Mr. Taylor was seated when Ms. Moore approached him. He showed her his booking confirmation. She dismissed it. She took his bag without permission and tried to move it to the back. When he stood up and asked her to stop, she dropped his bag on the floor. Elaine's voice was shaking now, but she didn't stop. She came back a second time and demanded he leave. He asked to speak to the captain. She reached for his personal belongings. He pulled back. That's it. He pulled back. He didn't grab her. He didn't touch her. She slapped him, full force, across the face. Then she told him she was going to report him for assault. The cabin was so quiet you could hear the ventilation system cycling air through the ducts. Candace took one step toward Elaine. Her voice came out like a hiss, low, venomous, shaking with rage. "You little traitor. You've been here 6 months. 6 months. You don't know a damn thing about how this works. When this is over, I will make sure you never work another flight as long as you—" "That's enough." Sullivan's voice cut through the cabin like a steel door slamming shut. "Miss Moore, stop talking, now." At that exact moment, the cockpit door opened. Captain Gregory Adams stepped into the cabin. He was still wearing his headset around his neck. His face was tight. He'd been monitoring the security radio channel for the last 2 minutes. He looked at Sullivan, then at Candace, then at Harrison. It took him about 30 seconds to be fully briefed, and in those 30 seconds, his expression went from professional neutrality to something close to cold fury. He turned to Candace. His voice was measured, military precision. "Miss Moore, you are relieved of duty on this flight, effective immediately. Collect your personal belongings. You have 60 seconds to deplane." Candace's mouth opened. "Captain, if you just let me explain." That was not a request. 60 seconds, starting now. Candace stood there for maybe 5 of those seconds. Her eyes darted around the cabin, to Sullivan, to the younger officer, to Elaine, and finally to Harrison. Harrison didn't look at her. He was already back on his tablet, already past her. Candace grabbed her bag from the galley. Her movements were jerky, frantic. The polished composure she'd worn like armor all morning had crumbled completely. She walked down the aisle toward the cabin door, her heels clicking unevenly now, no longer a confident march, a retreat. At the top of the air stairs, she turned back. Her mouth opened, maybe to shout something, maybe to beg, but the cabin door was already swinging shut. The last thing she saw was the back of Harrison Taylor's head, still, calm, unmoved. The air stairs retracted, the door was sealed, and Candace Moore stood alone on the tarmac in the early morning cold, watching the jet that would never be hers to work on again. The jet lifted off at 7:22, smooth, quiet. The engines hummed as the Gulf Stream climbed through a thin layer of clouds and broke into the open blue sky. Inside the cabin, everything was still. Elaine Foster brought Harrison a cup of coffee. Her hands were still trembling. Her voice was small. "Mr. Taylor, I'm so sorry about everything." Harrison looked up. For the first time that morning, his expression softened. He took the coffee. "Thank you, Elaine. What you did back there took courage." Her eyes glistened. She nodded and returned to the galley before the tears fell. Harrison set the coffee down, then picked up his personal phone and tapped one name, Derek Williams, his attorney of 14 years. Derek picked up on the second ring. "Harrison, it's early. What happened?" "I need you to move on something, now." His voice was calm, no anger, no heat, just cold surgical precision, like a general giving orders before a battle he already knew he'd win. He told Derek everything, the slurs, the bag, the slap, the fabricated radio call, the recording. Derek was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I've watched you walk away from situations like this more times than I can count. You always let it go." He paused. "Don't let this one go." "I wasn't planning to." Derek moved fast. Within 30 minutes, while Harrison was still airborne, he had a 4-step plan ready. First, file a formal assault complaint against Candace Moore with Teterboro Airport Police. Full recording attached as evidence. Second, send the recording to Luxair Atlantic's legal department with a demand letter. Written response required within 48 hours. Third, demand an internal investigation into Candace Moore's full employment history, prior complaints, disciplinary records, patterns. Fourth, formally notify Luxair Atlantic that Apex Horizon Enterprises was reviewing its charter management contract, $12 million a year, Luxair's single largest client relationship. Harrison approved every word. Derek said, "Letters will be sent before your wheels touch Savannah." The next call was to his wife, Vivian Taylor, 49, co-founder of a luxury fashion brand, elegant enough to fill a room, sharp enough to empty one. When Harrison finished telling her, the line went silent for 6 seconds. Then Vivian spoke. Her voice was ice wrapped in silk. "She put her hands on you, on your plane, then lied about it." "Yes." "Harrison, I love you. I respect your privacy, but this cannot stay quiet." Harrison hesitated. His anonymity was a tool. It let him see people for who they really were. But Vivian cut through every wall he built. How many people has she done this to who didn't have a recording, who didn't own the plane? You have the power to make sure this never happens again. Use it. Harrison closed his eyes, took a breath. "Call Sandra Coleman." Sandra Coleman, investigative journalist. She built her career covering racial bias in corporate America. Her stories didn't just go viral, they changed policies. Within the hour, Derek sent Sandra the recording with Harrison's written consent. The dominoes were falling. Meanwhile, on the ground, Nathan Brooks was about to have the worst morning of his life. Nathan Brooks, CEO of Luxair Atlantic. 20 years building a reputation for luxury and discretion. He was sitting in his Manhattan office when Derek's letter hit his inbox. He opened the attachment, pressed play. 12 minutes and 48 seconds later, he was staring at his screen with both hands flat on the desk, face gray, coffee untouched and cold. He watched Candace slap Harrison across the face. He heard her call him trash. He heard her fabricated distress call every ugly, undeniable second. He picked up his phone and called Harrison. Harrison didn't answer. Derek picked up instead. Polite, professional, devastating. "Mr. Brooks, Mr. Taylor will not be taking calls from Luxair until a formal written response is received. You have 48 hours. The line went dead. Nathan set his phone down, leaned back, and for the first time in 20 years as CEO, he had absolutely no idea what to do. 24 hours. That's all it took for Candace Moore's world to collapse. Luxair Atlantic's legal team reviewed the recording 3 times. 3 different lawyers. 3 identical conclusions. Undeniable misconduct, assault, and falsification of a security report. There was no gray area, no room for interpretation. The video showed everything. By noon the next day, Candace Moore was terminated. Not suspended, not reassigned, terminated, effective immediately. 12 years of seniority, gone in a single phone call. But the recording didn't just end Candace's career. It cracked open something much uglier. When Luxair's HR department pulled Candace's full employee file, the unfiltered version, not the sanitized summary managers usually see, what they found made the legal team go quiet. 3 prior complaints, all from passengers of color. The first, filed 18 months ago by a black businessman who said Candace refused to address him by name and repeatedly called him sir in a tone he described as dripping with contempt. Closed. No action. The second, filed 11 months ago by a Latino family who said Candace told them they were in the wrong section and physically blocked them from sitting in premium seats they had paid for. Closed. No action. The third, filed just 5 months ago by a young black woman traveling alone who said Candace made her show her boarding pass 4 separate times during a 2-hour flight. When the woman asked why, Candace allegedly replied, "Because I need to make sure you're supposed to be here." Closed. No action. All 3 complaints were investigated and dismissed by the same middle manager, a man named Gerald Dunn. He had signed off on every closure with the same generic note. Insufficient evidence to substantiate the claim. No further action required. Gerald Dunn was placed on administrative leave the same afternoon Candace was fired. He would never return to his desk. When Candace received her termination notice, she didn't go quietly. She hired an attorney within hours and fired back with a wrongful termination claim. Her argument? Harrison Taylor provoked her, that she felt threatened by his refusal to comply, that the slap was self-defense. Her attorney released a brief statement calling the termination premature and retaliatory. Nobody bought it. The recording existed. The recording didn't lie. Now, Nathan Brooks had a bigger problem. Harrison Taylor, through Derek Williams, had rejected Luxair's first settlement offer before the ink was dry. Nathan had offered everything he could think of: a formal written apology from the company, lifetime complimentary charter services, a $500,000 settlement for emotional distress and reputational harm, $500,000, delivered with a handwritten note from Nathan himself. Derek's response was 3 sentences. Mr. Taylor has no interest in Luxair's money. He is not for sale, and neither is his dignity. Instead, Harrison demanded 3 things. First, a public acknowledgement from Luxair Atlantic that systemic failures in their complaint handling process allowed a pattern of racial discrimination to continue unchecked for years. Second, a full third-party audit of Luxair's internal HR and complaint procedures, conducted by an independent civil rights organization. Not Luxair's lawyers, not Luxair's consultants, an outside team with no financial ties to the company. Third, mandatory anti-bias training for every single Luxair employee, flight crews, ground staff, management, executives. Designed and delivered by the independent organization. Funded entirely by Luxair. Nathan Brooks agreed to all 3 demands within 48 hours. He didn't negotiate. He didn't push back. He couldn't afford to, because the 4th blow was already falling. Despite every concession, Harrison followed through on his warning. Apex Horizon Enterprises formally terminated its charter management contract with Luxair Atlantic, $12 million a year. Gone. Derek's termination letter was 1 page, professional, devastating. The final line read, Apex Horizon Enterprises does not maintain business relationships with organizations that tolerate racial discrimination against its principal. Harrison moved his entire fleet management to a competing charter company, one with a documented, verified track record of diversity and equity compliance. The transition took less than a week. When the news hit industry channels, the reaction was immediate. Luxair Atlantic stock dropped 8% in a single trading day. Financial analysts called it a self-inflicted reputational wound. Aviation trade publications ran the story on their front pages. And Candace Moore, sitting alone in her apartment, refreshing her phone every 30 seconds, watched the company she had worked at for 12 years begin to crack at the foundation. Because of her. Because of one assumption, one slap, one lie. And she still had no idea how much worse it was about to get. Sandra Coleman published her story on a Tuesday morning at 6 a.m. Eastern. The headline hit like a freight train. Billionaire slapped on his own jet. Inside the incident that exposed a culture of racial bias at Luxair Atlantic. The article was thorough, detailed, devastating. Sandra had spent 4 days verifying every fact. The recording, the flight manifest, the security logs, the prior complaints. She interviewed Elaine Foster on the record. She obtained Luxair's internal HR documents through a source inside the company. She reached out to Candace Moore for comment. Candace declined. The story included key portions of the recording, with Harrison's full written consent. Not the entire thing, just enough. Candace's voice telling Harrison to get his black ass out of the seat, the sound of his bag hitting the floor, the crack of the slap, and then the silence that followed. That silence was what people couldn't stop talking about. Within 12 hours, the video clips embedded in the article had been viewed 6 million times. Within 24 hours, 11 million. By the end of the second day, The number crossed 14 million and was still climbing. The story didn't just trend, it detonated. Every major platform picked it up. Cable news ran segments. Morning shows played the clip. Podcasters dissected it frame by frame. Social media erupted. Hashtags like hashtag his own plane and hashtag Candace Karen dominated trending lists for 3 consecutive days. The public reaction was overwhelming, and it was almost entirely one-sided. People were furious. Not just black viewers, not just activists, everyone. Because the recording didn't leave room for debate. There was no ambiguity, no both sides. Just a woman spitting venom at a man for the color of his skin, and then slapping him when he refused to submit. Comment sections across every platform filled with the same kind of messages. She assaulted him on his plane. 12 years of complaints and nobody did anything? This is what happens when racism goes unchecked. But the internet wasn't the only place where consequences were building. 3 weeks after Sandra's article, the county district attorney's office filed formal criminal charges against Candace Moore. 2 counts. Count 1, simple assault. Based on the recorded slap and corroborated by Elaine Foster's sworn statement and Officer Sullivan's incident report. Count 2, filing a false report. Based on the recorded intercom call in which Candace told ground security that Harrison had grabbed her arm and became physically aggressive. Statements directly contradicted by the video evidence and every witness present. Candace's attorney tried to negotiate. He pushed for a plea deal, reduced charges, no jail time, community service only. The DA, facing intense public scrutiny and holding a case built on crystal clear evidence, offered no favorable terms. The case went to trial. It lasted 3 days. It could have lasted 3 hours. The prosecution's case was surgical. They played the full recording for the jury, unedited, uncut, 14 minutes and 32 seconds. The cabin, the voices, the slap, the lie. Every second of it is projected on a screen in a silent courtroom. Elaine Foster took the stand. She was nervous. Her hands gripped the edges of the witness box, but her testimony was steady, clear, unshakable. She described what she saw in the same order it happened. She never wavered, not once. Captain Gregory Adams provided a written statement confirming that Candace had not been briefed on the client because she failed to review the flight manifest, a direct violation of Luxair's standard operating procedure, a violation she had committed, a step she had skipped. Then, Candace took the stand. Her attorney had coached her. Stay calm, stay sympathetic, express remorse. It lasted about 4 minutes. Under cross-examination, the prosecutor asked one question that broke her. Miss Moore, can you explain to this courtroom why you assume Mr. Taylor did not belong in the owner's suite of his own aircraft? Candace opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. He didn't look like, he wasn't dressed like someone who would... She stopped. The courtroom was silent. 12 jurors stared at her. The judge stared at her. The gallery, packed with reporters and spectators, stared at her. She never finished the sentence. She didn't need to. Everyone in that room heard what she couldn't bring herself to say out loud. He didn't look like he belonged because he was black. The jury deliberated for less than 90 minutes. Guilty, both counts. The judge handed down the sentence. 18 months probation, 200 hours of community service to be completed at a civil rights education center, a $15,000 fine, and a permanent criminal record that would appear on every background check for the rest of her professional life. Candace stood in the courtroom as the verdict was read. She didn't cry. She didn't react. She just stood there, stiff, hollow, staring straight ahead like a woman watching the last door close. The industry fallout was just as brutal. Luxair Atlantic completed its third-party audit 8 weeks after the incident. The results were made public, and they were damning. The audit found a systemic pattern of ignored complaints, particularly from Black and Latino clients. Inadequate training, no accountability structure, a culture of silence enabled by middle managers like Gerald Dunn, who treated discrimination reports as paperwork to be filed and forgotten. 3 additional Luxair employees were terminated based on the audit findings. Gerald Dunn was fired with cause. His severance was revoked. Nathan Brooks, under pressure from the board and facing a shareholder revolt, stepped down as CEO 14 months after the incident. His resignation letter cited personal reasons. Nobody believed him. But something else happened in the aftermath. Something that mattered more than any verdict or settlement. Harrison Taylor, the man who never sought the spotlight, stepped into it, quietly, deliberately, on his own terms. He established the Taylor Equity Fund, $10 million, dedicated to providing free legal representation for individuals who experience racial discrimination in the service and hospitality industries, airlines, hotels, restaurants, retail. People who didn't have a recording, people who didn't own the plane, people whose stories would have disappeared into a complaint box and been stamped "No action required." In its first year, the fund took on 85 cases. 12 resulted in settlements. 4 went to trial. All 4 won. 2 major hotel chains reached out to the fund for consulting partnerships. A national airline revised its entire bias reporting protocol after one of the fund's cases exposed failures in their system. Candace Moore made one woman's career end in silence. Harrison Taylor made sure no one else would have to suffer that silence again. So, where is everyone now? Harrison Taylor closed the Savannah deal, $350 million. The acquisition went through without a single complication. His company, Apex Horizon Enterprises, expanded into 6 new markets within the following year. Revenue crossed $5 billion for the first time. But Harrison didn't change. Not really. He still flies private. He still wears hoodies. He still walks through terminals alone with no entourage and no fanfare. And yes, he still records. Every interaction, every time he senses something off, his phone is always ready. Because Harrison learned a long time ago that in a world that judges you by what you look like, proof isn't optional. It's survival. He gave one interview after the trial. Just one. A short conversation with Sandra Coleman. She asked him what he wanted people to take away from the story. He said, "I don't want people to remember my name. I want them to remember that this almost didn't come to light. If I hadn't pressed record that morning, it would have been her word against mine. And we both know how that usually ends." Candace Moore completed her 18 months of probation and 200 hours of community service. She fulfilled every requirement of her sentence. But the consequences didn't stop at the courtroom door. She applied to 4 airlines after her termination from Luxair. All 4 rejected her. She applied to 3 hospitality companies. Same result. Her name had become a cautionary tale, whispered in HR departments, cited in training seminars, referenced in corporate compliance manuals, not as a villain in a story, as a case study in what happens when bias goes unchecked and accountability finally arrives. A local news outlet tracked her down 8 months after the trial. She had relocated to a small town in another state. She was working at a retail store. She declined to comment. The reporter described her as visibly diminished, a woman living in the long shadow of a single morning. Elaine Foster never went back to Luxair Atlantic. She didn't have to. The charter company that took over Harrison's fleet management offered her a position, senior flight attendant, a title that would have taken her 5 more years to earn at Luxair. She accepted the same day. In an interview with an aviation trade magazine, Elaine was asked why she spoke up that morning when she knew it could cost her everything. She said, "Because I saw what happened, and staying silent would have made me part of it. I couldn't live with that." She paused, then added, "Silence isn't neutral. Silence is a choice. And that morning, I decided I wasn't going to choose it anymore." Luxair Atlantic survived, but it was never the same. They lost 2 additional major clients in the months following the scandal. Their stock took 11 months to recover to pre-incident levels. The brand that Nathan Brooks had spent 20 years building was permanently scarred, not by the incident itself, but by the years of ignored complaints that made the incident inevitable. The Taylor Equity Fund continued to grow. By the end of its second year, it had funded legal representation for over 160 cases of documented discrimination across 12 states. It partnered with 3 universities to develop bias awareness curricula for the hospitality and aviation industries. Harrison personally reviewed every quarterly report. He never sought credit. He never held a press conference. He just kept building, the same way he'd always built, quietly, deliberately, with purpose. All right, look, yeah, the story itself, that part's made up. But that feeling, though, like being embarrassed, people already judging you, treating you like you did something wrong before you even say anything, yeah, that's real. That happens all the time. And most of the time, there's no camera, no nothing. Nobody sees it. And I'm not gonna lie, that part right there, yeah, that one kind of sticks with me.